Did you know that the culture we think of as Japan today is built on thousands of years of adaptation, resisting massive empires and carving its own unique path? From Bronze Age fishing villages to futuristic neon lights, this story isn't just about emperors. It's about resilience. Get ready to see how an island nation mastered the art of change. Long before written history chronicled their actions, the islands of Japan were home to deep mythologies that laid the foundational blueprint for Japanese identity. Our story begins in prehistory, a time marked by the gradual emergence of sophisticated clan structures and powerful supernatural beings. The earliest records speak of magnificent divine rulers, like the heavenly sovereigns Izanagi and Izanami, whose union is said to have birthed the very islands themselves from the depths of the sea. These foundational myths gave rise to idealized ancestries that subsequent clans would proudly claim, linking their lineage directly to divine authority. As time marched on, these mythological foundations solidified into real-world power structures. By the Kofun period, we see the growth of noble families and localized clans who established rigid social hierarchies anchored in these ancient claims. From powerful warlord figures to scholarly priestly houses, these emerging clans dominated the political landscape by maintaining control over both land and tradition. These legendary beginnings weren't just stories. They were the ideological bedrock that allowed Japan's unique societal patterns, its deep respect for lineage and established order, to take root. Even when military rulers held all the actual power, and emperors were mere figureheads hidden deep within Kyoto's palaces, the imperial line remained an absolute constant, a luminous thread through Japan's tumultuous history. For nearly 2 millennia, the perceived continuity of the divine lineage served as the nation's deepest spiritual core. It was not that the emperor held political sway in the era of the shogunates. Military lords like Minamoto no Yoritomo dictated policy and war. However, they could never erase the symbolism of legitimacy tied to the unbroken bloodline tracing back to Amaterasu, the sun goddess. This deep cultural resonance meant that while men wore samurai armor, heart and soul still looked toward Kyoto's sacred stones. Through periods of intense instability, from the tumultuous Heian period to the strict rule of the Edo shogunate, the court life maintained a careful dignity largely shielded from outright conflict. The sheer survival of this institution, the ritual continuation of imperial presence, even if purely symbolic, gave Japan its unique sense of unbroken national identity. It is this enduring, almost sacred performance of kingship that continues to root itself in the modern Japanese psyche. Now we arrive at perhaps the most iconic period in Japanese history, the age of the samurai. For centuries, these mounted warriors weren't merely skilled fighters. They were an entire governing class whose very existence elevated military skill into a sacred art form. Their code, Bushido, wasn't just a set of rules. It was the foundation of their honor, linking concepts like loyalty and self-sacrifice to martial prowess. From the powerful warlords establishing domains during periods like the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, their influence spread until they effectively governed Japan for centuries after unification under peace eras. This transition allowed the warrior class to redefine what it meant to be honorable, pivoting their focus from simple survival to a dedication to duty and perfection. To master the katana was not just about technique. It was about embodying Bushido, transforming warfare into a spiritual practice. These lords and warriors set an enduring standard of disciplined life that continues to captivate us even today. But even though emperors ruled from Kyoto, holding immense religious and symbolic power, the real operational might always belonged elsewhere, to ambitious warrior clans. Over time, this power shifted dramatically as increasingly volatile conflicts turned the centralized imperial court into a ceremonial figurehead. The military elite realized that true control didn't come through ritual. It came through spears and organizational force. This pivotal shift culminates in the ascendancy of the shogun, a supreme military commander whose authority quickly eclipsed even that of the emperor himself. By establishing the shogunate, clans like the Minamoto effectively militarized government, governing Japan not from palatial elegance, but from strategic castles designed for warfare. The period after the great conflicts saw these warlords establish stable regional domains, fundamentally changing the power dynamic forever. They weren't just soldiers, they were lawmakers and administrators, building massive bureaucratic structures that defined Japanese life for centuries. This system meant that while tradition remained rooted in the imperial court, actual political might flowed entirely from the warrior class, the samurai through their appointed proxy, the shogun. But Japan's path wasn't always shaped purely by its own traditions. Sometimes, history arrived on foreign waves. The first massive intellectual shock came via Asia, principally through Buddhism, which began filtering into Japan as early as the 6th century. It was a spiritual revolution that fundamentally altered understanding of life and death. These ideas traveled along established trade routes, often carried not by conquering armies, but by passionate monks and scholars who saw Japan as a fertile ground for enlightenment. Centuries later, while Japan pursued fascinating periods of intense isolation, external pressures eventually built great momentum, especially with the increasing maritime reach of European powers. The arrival of Western naval ships in the mid-19th century delivered an undeniable shock to the established political order, demanding modernization at an unprecedented speed. From suddenly needing to negotiate treaties with figures from powers like Britain and the United States, Japan was forced into a dizzying era of rapid reform, transitioning from insular empire to global player against all expectations. For over 2 centuries, Japan practiced a deliberate policy of cultural and maritime closure known as *sakoku*. This period allowed the country to develop unique traditions far removed from the turmoil of the West, guarding its culture with extreme vigilance. But eventually, stability gave way to pressure. This was most dramatically illustrated in 1853 when Commodore Matthew Perry's American fleet arrived, demanding that Japan engage with global trade. The shockwave of foreign power forced a painful reevaluation of Japanese sovereignty and independence. This tension culminated in the tumultuous events leading up to the Meiji Restoration in 1868. Power rapidly shifted from the isolated Yage-u Japanese letter Chinese letter shogunate back to the emperor, sparking an era of astonishing urgency. The new Meiji government embraced rapid westernization, adopting everything from steamships and railways to constitutional frameworks. Within decades, Japan transformed itself from a secluded feudal nation into an industrial modern powerhouse, forever altering its place on the global stage. But even after the devastating defeat in 1945 and the ensuing Allied occupation, Japan's spirit refused to break. The initial years were bleak, cities were rubble, and war-weary citizens struggled with poverty. Yet, under the strict guidance of the occupation forces, including SCAP, seeds of radical change began to sprout. Education was revamped, promoting democratic ideals, while reforms dismantled the old power structures that had fueled militarism. Crucially, Japan's deep investment in industrial education and technology allowed for rapid innovation when the global economy finally reopened its doors. By focusing on labor-saving machinery and consumer electronics, from transistors to sophisticated cars, the backbone of Japanese industry was rebuilt not just from wood and steel, but from sheer human ingenuity. This determined work ethic, combined with government foresight and the focus on export markets, launched an unprecedented economic boom starting in the 1950s and 60s. Within decades, Japan didn't just recover, it surpassed its previous status, becoming one of the world's undisputed technological heavyweights, a true modern miracle built from wartime ashes. But look around today, and you realize that Japan's story isn't confined to eras past. It unfolds right here, seamlessly blended into a single, dazzling present. It is perhaps nowhere more evident than in the country's unique cultural fusion, where millennia of deeply rooted traditions don't clash with futuristic technology, but rather merge with remarkable grace. Picture a Shinto festival crowd moving through an immaculate Ginza street, still revering ancient kami while flashing past advertising holograms powered by AI. This coexistence is not merely decorative. It fundamentally defines modern Japanese life. The meticulous artisanal process of a centuries-old swordsmith is now paired by younger designers who use augmented reality to visualize the sword's historical context for global buyers. Even in entertainment, the deepest reverence for folklore remains active. Think of advanced robotics mimicking no-drama movements or anime that critiques complex samurai honor codes. This isn't just preservation, it's a dynamic evolution, proving that while their history stretches back through Nara and Heian eras, Japan is always looking forward, ensuring that tomorrow feels just as rich with soul as yesterday did. From ancient clans to global tech leaders, Japan's history isn't just surviving, it's adapting on an unbelievable scale. Every period reveals a core truth, that human ingenuity and cultural dedication can conquer geopolitics. Which chapter of Japanese history do you find the most powerful? Let us know in the comments below.